What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are going to be working on a 2020 BMW 330i xDrive. Today on the G20 behind me, this is a B48 4-cylinder turbo equipped car. We are going to be covering a complete coolant refresh. We're going to be breaking up this series of videos into 6 videos. 1 going to be the radiator replacement, 2 the heat module, aka your thermostat, 3 your water pump and pulley, 4 is going to be the oil cooler slash oil filter housing, 5 will be your expansion tanks for both the low temp and high temp circuits, and 6 being the serpentine belt and tensioner. For the focus of this DIY today though, we are going to be working on the radiator replacement. This should be a pretty straightforward job on the G20 and pretty similar to your B58 equipped cars, as well as that same cooling sandwich that is located at the front of the car remains the same. There's a couple different ports on the B58 radiator, which is going to be for the aux coolers on either corner of the front end. These typically can last sometimes the lifetime of the vehicle, but the reality is you have metal with plastic, and over time, heat cycles, things tend to get brittle, and usually your leaks start to happen at the end tanks. Of course, that's not accounting for physical damage from maybe a stick going through the front end or something like that. With that, we always recommend some coolant. We have HT12 coolant, which is the green coolant that most of these newer BMWs take. And then anything like a radiator hose is a nice to have, not mandatory, but these tend to get stuck to the fittings. The O-rings can go flat over time, causing you a leak when you reassemble everything. So we'll be going over these and which ones we replace while we have the radiator out. But before we get into it, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. All right, for this DIY, we have a long pry bar, a large flathead screwdriver work as well. We have a 1/2-inch ratchet. We have a 3/8 drive torque wrench. We have a 1/4-inch ratchet, an extension for the 1/4-inch, and then a couple adapters to get us between the 2 sizing of ratchets that we have here. As far as sockets go, we have an E20. That's going to be our specialty socket, along with a T30. We have both an extended and shortened version. For normal sockets or regular 6-hex sockets, we have a 18 mil, a 13, a 10, and an 8. We have a couple different flatheads and pick tools, as well as some rivet and trim removal tools. We have these pliers. These are going to come in handy for releasing some of the PCB lines that we're going to be working with. I am a righty and my right hand is out of commission, so you may do without these, but my left hand is useless. Moving forward, we have some electric tools to help with the removal and install of some of the hardware. We have our UV vacuum fill tool, which is going to be part of the refilling procedure for the G20. Again, we're doing both the low temp and high temp circuits, even though you really only need to drain the low temp for this system, but it's one of those things where it just covers all encompassing. Also needed but not pictured is going to be a catch can for your coolant, and like any other DIY that's a bit involved, especially on these newer cars, be sure to watch all the way through in case we add any tools throughout the process. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, to get started on this series of cooling system overhaul, replacement, whatever you want to call it, our first step for all of these is going to be to disconnect the battery. We're going to undo the negative terminal first, 10 mil socket. All right, we'll tuck that baby down, and just as insurance, we'll do the positive terminal as well and let it sit to the side. If you want to be extra safe, you can put some towel or something in between these so they don't make contact. And then just so we don't forget, we are going to either put a towel or just put the trunk liner back in, sticking out so that no one closes this trunk, making it harder to get to the battery when we're done. All right, continuing on from battery removal, again, we're going to be joining both circuits, whether you're just doing the expansion tanks or you're doing the oil filter housing or the water pump, whatever it may be. We're still going to cover how to drain the entire system, since we're going to have to fill either one or both at some point, depending on which video you are watching. But next on our list of things is going to be to remove the caps to the expansion tanks. Obviously, this should go without saying, but you're only wanting to do this on a nice cold system. This car's been sitting in the garage overnight and prepped for today, so it's nice and cold. Last thing you want to do is burn yourself or damage the car. All right, with these 2 caps off and out of our way, something that can come off now is also our beauty cover. This just lifts up and you can set it to the side. All right, at this point, we are getting a bit closer to draining the high temp and the low temp circuit. In order to get the high temp circuit drained, you can go about it two ways, but both are going to require the removal of the air intake. One is going to be to undo the auxiliary pump, which we will be doing, also removing one of the lines coming off of the water pump itself, and that's going to drain most of that side of things. The other thing would be, again, to remove this whole air intake box and silencer, then remove the fan, and you can get to the lower radiator hose, of course, once you remove the skid plate underneath. So you can tackle it either way you like. We'll show you both. Before I get it into the actual draining though, we are going to remove this air silencer / air box intake system here so that it's out of our way for all of the following videos that we're working on. All right, we're just going to work our way around our air box here. We have an electrical connector here that we're going to undo. With these, you want to free up the little gray tab, just unlock it. Little flathead screwdriver, nice and gently works. Then you can press on the tab and pull back. If you need to, you can use the flathead to pry and release that. You'll see there's a little alligator clip here. We're just going to pop that off of the intake here using a little flathead. These can be a little bit stubborn if they've never been off before. I have to switch over to a pick tool. But this is going to be a common theme throughout this DIY. There might be wondering, what DIY? All of them. And then for now, we'll just pull it back and tuck it somewhere over the valve cover. From here, we have another alligator clip that rides onto the top of our silencer. We just need to free that one off of the, we'll call it the air box assembly. All right, that can stay loose for now. If you can see right next to that, we have another little gray connector here. We're going to release that baby up. Following this line, we're going to go to this PCB line right here. We have two ridge sides to this connection that goes on top of our valve cover. We're going to pinch on both sides and then lift the line off. There we go. I just use these pliers. My right hand is out of commission, so I'm a little limited to what I can do with my left hand, but squeezing these two tabs helps release that. As we pull out this whole thing, I think what we're going to do here is disconnect our plug on top of our turbo here. And that's just going to help free up this harness so that we don't have to really worry too much about bending things around to clear that as we pull out the air box. So this will give us a little bit more working room. Again, just a little gray lock there. Once it's out, press down, pull that baby back, and this can swing up here as well. That'll be out of our way. Still have another PCB line to undo. You're going to see the one up top here. There's another connector actually at the bottom. That's what's going into our intake. So we're going to release it from down here. Squeeze both sides, same thing, and then try to pull up and release. I'm going to come from the passenger side. To give us a little bit more room to see exactly what we're breaking here, we're going to undo this flathead clamp and just separate the air box from the rest of the intake. It's going to make our lives a little bit easier. Thread this baby back together, and we'll throw that back on our air box once we pull it out. These are just held in by rubber grommets. You can pull it out as a whole and then set this to the side. Now with that off, we can see a little bit better what we have going on. Here's that vacuum line down here at the bottom. These clips are toast just from touching them. So what we're going to do is we're going to release the feed from the turbo. You can see just a little bit on the top, part of that quick disconnect clamp, similar to the coolant lines. You can also see it underneath the diverter valve. Take a peek from underneath. So now we're going to release the clip going to our turbo from the inlet, and that way we can try to pull this whole assembly towards us a little bit and get that last PCB line out. It's okay if this flings off, just don't forget to reattach it after the fact. Now we should be able to pull this back. If it's still hung up, then more than likely your clip is still doing something. in which case you can continue to remove it or pull it off the rest of the way. I'm gonna reach in there for 1 sec. Now we're gonna squeeze these two together again, do our best to try to get this line off, although these tabs are cooked from living so close to the turbo, we might have to replace them, in which case we will drop that in the video description below. All right, and with that, we can pull this assembly out, giving us way more room to not only the fan and the coolant lines going to the radiator. Once we get this charge pipe out of the way, though, we'll have room to our water pump, our serpentine belt, all that good stuff over here in this area. So let me set this to the side and we'll go on from there. So on the quest to drain our high temp circuit, we have our charge pipe here, which you can see now clearly goes down here. So we're going to undo that clip similar to the one we just did at the turbo inlet. We have 2 electrical connectors. Then we have a couple Torx holding this on to the throttle body. So let's start with the electrical connectors. We'll disconnect those first, and then we'll move on to the Torx, then the clip at the bottom, and we'll pull this baby out of our way. We have 3 T30s. I'm gonna start blasting these off. Here's our bottom one closer to the alternator, the extended T30. Pull back, gentle pull back, and look at all the room that gives us. I'm gonna set this baby to the side, and then we'll go from there. All right, at this point, we are almost ready to start draining the side of the high temp circuit, again, via BMW's instructions by the auxiliary pump here and our main water pump. Before we do that though, the reality is most of the coolant is just gonna drip down the front of the block, over our steering rack, subframe, all that good stuff, which is fine, we can clean that up. There is no drain petcock on this system that you can just go from underneath and release, unfortunately. That's something that they kind of have done away with on these models. So what we're gonna do before we do anything else is remove the lower skid plate so that our coolant can go straight through to our catch pan. We will also remove the lower driver's side, if you will, like belly pan, part of the fender liner. That's gonna give us access to the coolant line for the low temp circuit. Let's get underneath. Too much talking. Skid plates, maybe we'll just rip the low temp circuit while we're down there, and then we'll go from there. All right, to get us started, we have 10 8mm for the center shield. Then we'll move on to the one on the driver's side. Removing that one actually gave us access to our low temp circuit line, which is excellent. So you don't really have to worry too much about this side, but we still do need to get this plate off, which is why we removed this front one to expose our hardware. So with that, let's blast this baby out of here. All right, we have 9 18mm bolts holding in this bottom shield. Let's zap these babies out. All right, with that panel removed, now that's gonna open up all the area here for our coolant to kind of trickle its way through. Before we get back down on the ground though, let's take advantage of being up here with the hose here for our low temp circuit now, and we'll go ahead and pop that out. We'll drain it. Once it's done draining, we'll plug it back in, and then we don't have to worry about it. Again, if you want a little bit more room to work with, there is 3 more 8mm here at the front, and you have another 3 here on the inside of the fender liner holding on this cheek. But I think we should be fine. Our clip is right here. So let's get our catch pan. Again, lid is off of the expansion tank up top. Let's get that baby drained. First, we're gonna release the clip to our coolant line. I'm just using a small pick to get in here since it's a little tiny spot. Small flathead would work too. All right. And then this is the part where we take a shower. So we're gonna position our catch pan as best as we can and then work this line off. There we go. Man, that took a whole 25-inch pry bar to free up that hose. That's how stuck these O-rings can get. All right, we're gonna let that do its thing. We'll let it drip, and then we'll come back and plug it back up. With our low temp system drained, we're gonna pop our hose back on, then I'll throw the clip back on. but that will be good for the low coolant or low temp system. So we'll throw a clip back on there and then we'll be good to rock and roll. All right, with that part of the system drained, now we're gonna head back up into the engine bay. We'll get a lower catch pan for our coolant for the high temp circuit underneath the car, and we'll go from there. All right, next on the list is gonna be removing our auxiliary pump. For those of you just doing the serpentine belt DIY, you can simply undo the clamp and just swing the pump out of your way. But for everything else, we are draining the cooling system. So again, we're gonna continue on with the high temp circuit now, starting at the auxiliary pump. So we're gonna move that out of our way in full. So if you're just doing the belt and tensioner, you can just unplug the electrical connector and then swing the pump out of the way. We have our catch pan situated down below. Now we're gonna get our coolant line here. I'm just gonna pop this baby up. Same as the other lines we've been doing. So you'll see this magenta coolant coming out of our system. This indicates that your car more than likely has been at a dealer for a repair. And between BMW switching from the blue coolant to the green coolant, at one point the dealers were having to use this magenta pink stuff. And that was like a good way for them to keep track of, you know, what's been through the dealer network for a repair versus not. So more than likely this was in for something, whether it was warranty work or post-warranty work. This car has had a rough previous life. So that's just something to note. We're gonna be filling this up with green, but totally compatible, just something funky in the old BMW world. While that's still draining, we're gonna do the other line here. All right, we're gonna let this drain for a little bit and then we'll come back up to removing the rest of the auxiliary pump. Next, we'll undo our little electrical connector. We have a 10 mil down below holding the clamp together for this auxiliary pump. And then that pump can come out. We'll leave the bracket with the pump, and I'm gonna throw the 10 mil nut bracket here so that we don't have to guess where that goes later. And then we'll probably fight with it later when we're dealing with this hose. All right, moving on, you can see on this little damper cover, this little resonator cover that we have on the front of the engine block, we have a couple more alligator clips here. We're gonna release these so that when we pull this cover off, this harness can kind of do its own thing. So there's one. We have one more here. I'm just gonna open up this baby here. The other thing we can probably do is just pull the rivet out of the cover here, but sometimes that can rip too, depending on how old the stuff is. Let's see if we can, no, that one's putting up a little bit of a fight. So I'm just trying to split this clamp open here. Just easier said than done. There we go. All right. Wonderful. We have one more alligator clip that goes to the lower auxiliary pump here, and down below you can see the connector for it. I don't really think this will be in our way, but just for sake of filming and giving you the best view, we're going to go ahead and undo it. So let me separate the alligator clip off the auxiliary pump first. And then if we follow that down, we'll see our electrical connector down below. I'm going to unlock that gray tab as carefully as I can. Now with that, we have a couple expanding rivets to remove to get this little cover off. So let's work on that next. I'm going to use a little flathead screwdriver to try to pop these babies open. You can use rivet removal pliers, which we have, but I mean, again, you don't have to add more tools than already needed to this list. Let's just keep it nice and simple here, shall we? We have a third one hiding behind the auxiliary pump that we just did the electrical connector from. It's going to be a little bit sneaky to record, but it is there. In the sky. I'll get that one after. We have one more here on the bottom corner. That's going to be right down there on the bottom left. All right. Here's a better view of that cover. We had rivet 1, rivet 2, 3 behind the auxiliary pump, and 4. We're gonna clean this up, set it to the side, but now we have a way better view. And before we get too carried away here with the high temp draining, you can take a look actually. And right behind that coolant hose, you'll see a lot of dried pink stuff here. So either it had a leak at one point, or it's just starting to leak enough where it's only starting to get a little bit coated here. I don't know, we'll have to see once we get this hose out. But next, to continue with the high temp draining, high temp circuit is gonna be this clamp here. So let's get ready for that. Now to finally drain the high temp circuit, we're gonna undo what is essentially the lower radiator hose. We're gonna pull that clip out and then see what our luck is at pulling this hose off. All right, now we're gonna move on with just the radiator replacement. So for that, we have a ton of plastic rivets to remove. We have these two little, we'll call them little corner shields, little cheeks to get off so that we can work on removing the radiator support up top. I'm gonna use an expanding rivet plier set to remove 4 on this side. We'll have another 4 on this side, and we'll have a few more up front. This weather seal can go now too, since it's on top of everything. Just presses on. There's a little channel here at the bottom that bites into the slip, and that's what holds that in place. We'll set that to the side. You can also use a little flathead screwdriver or something of that sort to get these out. Whatever you have lying around, you don't have to get all fancy with a tool like this. Set that to the side. We'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll get the center piece. We're just gonna keep working our way over, and then we'll go from there. All right, let me set this to the side. And then from there, we are going to work on relieving this hood release cable so it's out of our way. With that cable out of our way, we have some hardware to get this top aluminum bracket off before we get to the lower bracket below. So let's get our T30 and our socket and blast some hardware off. All right, we have 3 T30s to remove from this plate. And then we have 8 13mm bolts to remove. All right, next, to free up this brace, we have 4 T30s. We have 2 on either front side of the latches that we're gonna remove. All right, and then we have 4 E-Torques, 2 on either side. And of course, you already know those are one-time use and will be linked in the video description below. And with those out, this baby can come up. Oh, we have a little wire that we need to free up, just a little rivet, and then we'll set it to the side. Next on this radiator removal, we are going to get the lower radiator hose completely off. We'll get some electrical connectors off and out of our way. We can start with those now so that we can swing them over. We have the connector for the fan. That's 2 release tabs, 1 on either side. Let's give them a good pinch. And then you should be able to pull them back. These are a little bulky and they've never been off again. It can be a little bit of a task, but once you release that, then we're gonna release the temp sensor down here. This one has a gray locking tab on the underside, which is a little hard to see, but it's gonna be similar to all the other gray locking tabs that we have been releasing so far. I'm just gonna use a little right angle pick to release that one. Try to be as gentle as possible. That should be good. Press on it and release. Now we can swing this over and just tuck it out of our way. While I have you here, we have our lower radiator hose. Let's go ahead and release that locking clip. And then we can see how tight this hose is on there. This we are going to be replacing. And just keep in mind, if you're, let's say you're doing just some other unrelated work, when you separate the lines from plastic connections like this, over time, the neck off the radiator can also be brittle, and it's a good way to break stuff. So in this case, everything's gonna be new. I'm not worried if I break this, but the goal is obviously to treat things as if you had to put them back together. You can see on this hose, this O-ring is looking pretty flat. This is a now 5-year-old car at the time of filming. So definitely would not feel comfortable putting that back in. But if you had to, a little bit of dielectric grease or some sort of silicone that isn't going to degrade the rubber will help it seal back up. So we're going to set this hose to the side. Again, we have a new one. But for now, let's continue on with this fan shroud removal. We have 4 T30s to remove. We have 2 on the fan shroud side of things and 2 on this upper cover that kind of helps keep this whole sandwich assembly together. So we're going to take all 4 off now. Now with those undone, on this side we have this little kind of release tab that we're going to push forward. That's going to help unlock the fan shroud. So we're going to push forward and lift up. Oh, don't forget the coolant line down below. Again, if you're doing this on a B58, you may have a few more than just one on your fan shroud assembly. Just be sure to release them before you pull up. The fan shroud has these channels here, little tab here. Same on the other side, little tab here in these channels that just kind of help press it into place. Those have never been out before. This might be a little bit tedious, just like it was for us now, but just continue pulling it up nice and straight and you'll be good to go. Let's set this to the side and go from there. We have this upper piece here that just kind of goes around the front side of the sandwich. So if you look here, you'll see it just kind of wraps around. There's really nothing else holding it on other than the T30s we took off. So now we can set this to the side and we have a nice view of our radiator. All right, before we work on pulling the radiator out, we have the upper hose to undo still. So same thing, quick release clip, pull this baby up, and pull the clip off just to make our lives easier. All right, and then we'll give it a shot at pulling this upper off, but I have a feeling it is going to be stubborn. Tip that I'm thinking of now as we're doing this, do that hose before you disassemble everything so that the radiator isn't dancing around on you like it is on me right now, but no big deal. We have a little pry bar and we'll just course it off and we're good to go. All right, now to get the radiator out, the goal is to kind of push it away from the intercooler as we lift up. You can see I'm getting a little jammed up on this cooler right here. We may have to undo that to give ourselves a little bit more wiggle room, which if so is no problem, but we'll give this one more shot as it is. Yeah, all right, let's move this. There's one bolt holding it in, a 10 mil, so we have a little bit of play in it, and then we can push this corner out. This corner has nothing in front of it, so it's coming out no problem, but we're still stuck on the driver's side. We're gonna undo the 10 mil here. It's gonna free up that cooler assembly. So, full disclosure, one of the problems we're having here is this car was involved in some police activity. And one of the aluminum brackets that holds this whole sandwich in place, for those of you with an eagle eye, you would have seen that when we were draining the low temp circuit at the beginning of the video, is broken. So this whole cooler sandwich assembly is moving around more than it should, which is making it hard to separate the radiator from the sandwich here. So for those of you at home that hopefully don't have that problem, this should be a little bit more straightforward. This whole thing shouldn't be moving around as much on the bottom section as this one is. And so hopefully you're able to get this radiator out. But the whole idea is to have it forward as it is now, and then lift up, and that's going to free it up from the bracket down below. Again, we're having issues because everything is moving down below for us. So just something to keep in mind. So if you take a look here with the radiator tilted forward to help myself from the situation that we are in specifically, I then just gently went in here and unlocked the radiator from the plastic sandwich down below. So now we can pull this baby out. So if you're having the same issue, super gently coming down here, just separate these two. Barely any force here. Should move nice and easy. Be mindful that there will be coolant in the radiator still, so we have our catch band positioned properly so that we can catch any of that we may lose in this journey here. Let's drain some coolant out of it. but if you come around the other side without me moving it too much, you can see this is not horrible. Again, the car is really only 4 years old, 5 years old. But there is a bit of debris in here, and over time this is only going to get worse, which is going to reduce the efficiency of your cooling system. Now, also keep in mind, this is the most rearward unit, meaning there's still another cooler in front of it. So this is how plugged up this is, and that other one must be pretty plugged up too. Not a bad idea to spend some time with an air compressor and an air line and just blowing it out, maybe a shop vac if that's all you have, before installing your new radiator. I'm going to drain this, set this to the side, clean up a little bit, and then we'll get ready to put a new radiator in. Before we go with the new radiator in, we just wanted to show you quickly where those two little tabs on the bottom of your radiator, these guys right here, key into, which is why they're kind of rounded at the bottom and slim up top, which is why we do the folding forward motion first. That unhooks them, and that's going to be down here below. So if you take a look at this channel down here, right where I just made a little bit of mark with some wet water, that is that channel that the radiator lives in. So you can see how it's leaned forward, and that's how you unlock it from those bottom brackets. You can also see how ours is, again, broken. This shouldn't move down there. You can see between the hose and the aluminum subframe, that metal bracket, that's broken there. So that was making it a little bit more challenging for us. But nonetheless, we'll get through it. We'll repair that bracket. Alex will get a new one. But for now, let's get our new radiator in. So what I'm doing from the top is I'm grabbing it and I'm pushing it so that it's tilting the bottom half inward. And we'll know we're situated on both sides when it looks like this from above. You'll see both ends narrowing down at the bottom between the intercooler radiator and the radiator. All right, with our radiator seated all the way in at the bottom on both sides, getting it to then feed in back into its existing bracket should be nice and smooth. So this will be good here for us to work with. Down here at the bottom, you'll see two little slats openings. Those are going to be for the two slats here on our fan shroud, which is what we're going to throw back in next. These and these, so those need to be in there to help locate and secure everything in the right place. Be mindful of this coolant line as we go down there. And right now, again, everything's nice and loose. We still have the 10 mil out of that cooler so that we can move things out of our way. But we'll kind of try to keep this back while the fan goes in so that we can get the sides of the fan, these little slats, back into the little channels that are coming off of the radiator. You can see those on either side. The other one's right behind that cooler, and they just help locate the whole fan shroud. With that fan shroud in, we can at least get the forward T30s in place to hold this sandwich assembly whole, and then we'll go from there. With our fan shroud lined up, now we're going to get this top cover piece in place. You can see right here on my index finger there's a little channel, and that just kind of helps line up this little clip here as it goes in. All right, with that, we can feed this hard line back in to our clip, like so. We have our temp sensor, which does not come included with your new radiator, so you can either opt to put in a new one or take the old one out of the old unit. We're gonna go with a new one. A little bit of dielectric grease on the O-ring. There's a channel for these to go in. There's a channel on the top of the sensor and the housing on the radiator. They only go in one way. Get that lined up and push that baby in. Now from there, we can swing over our harness. Get these two babies plugged back in. And the gray locking tab, you push that in. That locks that in. Electrical connector. Here we go. All right, from there, we're gonna work on getting our upper support back in. Then we'll get the aluminum piece, everything buttoned all back up, and then we will proceed from there. Now we're going to feed our cross support back in, being mindful of the little harness that we popped off of it earlier. One thing I did want to point out, again, this car has had a life before us. There's a little tab here, and this originally helped hold the wiring for the fan here in place. There used to be some some like harness wrap around it, some of that felt material, and that would have kept it there. So if you want to throw a zip tie on that as you put things back together to keep that from moving, probably not a bad idea. With that loosely in place, we're going to get our 4 E20s started by hand. Again, these are one-time use, so these are brand new, as they are torqued to yield, meaning they get stretched. All right, these E20s get torqued to 56 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. Don't forget to pop your little rivet back in for this harness here. All right, with that, we're gonna get our aluminum panel back over, and then from there, we can get our hood release cable situated once more. Before we get too carried away, should have done this before the bracket. Can't forget to throw our 10 mil bolt back in. That holds our cooler assembly in place. And nice and snug, and we're good to rock. All right, now we're gonna put our aluminum piece back over. These little alignment dowels go into these rubber grommets up top here, which helps keep this whole thing lined up properly. Let's get our hood release cables back in place. I'm gonna feed the little ball end in, like so. This back in there. Close that baby shut, and then pop the little rubber grommets underneath back into these 2 holes here on the frame. Beautiful. Let's tuck our wire back in, or I should say our cable back in. Beautiful. Now we can throw our weather stripping and panels back on. So let's get this baby keyed in. This is going to tuck in ever so slightly underneath our grill. Just make sure those holes are lined up. Let's get this right panel situated here first. That's going to tuck underneath the trim here, like so. All right, now we can throw our weather stripping back on, or our weather seal, I should say. I like to first feed it in. It's going to tuck in just ever so slightly underneath the fender. And then we'll grab that ridge that I showed you during removal, get it started, and then key it back in all the way to the fender. Beautiful. All right, now that we have our radiator fully locked in, everything's buttoned up, we have 2 more bits to do before we go any further, and that's going to be to hook up both the upper and lower radiator hose to the rad. Again, a little bit of dielectric grease on that O-ring is going to go a long way. We're going to feed that baby onto the neck of the radiator, and then once we have it lined up, we're just going to click it in until we hear it engage. Let's do the same thing to the lower radiator hose. Bam, baby. From there, we can hook it back up to the water pump side of things and go from there. All right, we're going to secure our lower auxiliary pump once more into its little plastic housing. I had threaded the 10 mil nut back onto the stud earlier so that I didn't lose it. So I'm going to take that off. And you can see the latch is going over the stud. I'm going to reach in for a moment, get that 10 mil nut back on, and then we'll snug it up. All right, now that we have that baby situated, we can reattach our lower radiator hose back onto the pipe coming out right beside our water pump. Same thing, a little bit of lube on that O-ring, it's gonna go a long way. These are gonna go to our auxiliary pump, which before we throw that baby on, let's go ahead and get our acoustic cover situated back on. We're gonna get our 4 expanding rivets started, get those babies lined up. There's 1, 2 is gonna be behind these lines. Just why we keep the auxiliary pump out and out of the way. 3 is gonna be in the lower left corner. So there's the rivet there, then we're gonna push it in. And then 4 down below our lower auxiliary pump. A little bit tight to see, but you can just get in there. All right. With that baby in, let's get our auxiliary pump bolted back up to the bracket, and then we'll clip in the lines and the electrical connector for it. Just taking off the 10 mil that I situated on here before. We're gonna get this baby on, back over its stud, get that 10 mil nut back on. And let's snug up that 10 mil with the electric ratchet once more. Both of these coolant lines can get plugged back into the pump. There's two. We have our auxiliary pump electrical connector, which we had swung up over here. That's going to come back down and plug in to the bottom of our pump right up front there. All right. Alligator clip off the pump bracket right here. This line runs off the front here on this little clamp. And then this guy was also clipped to the acoustic cover right in front of this lower coolant line. So pretty straightforward, just keeping everything nice and tidy. Oh, you know what? This is gonna have to run behind the two coolant lines. So I'll pop those off really quick and we'll feed the line behind it. And then we can hook those coolant lines back up. No big deal, it'll take 2 seconds, but that's why taking photos and that kind of stuff when you take things apart will go a long way. While we're here, we can also plug in the auxiliary pump. All right, we're gonna get our charge pipe back in, get that fit in here underneath the turbo. There we go. Hear that little click. That means we're locked in. Give it a little bit of a twist. Helps heat that O-ring. We're gonna lock this baby up over here. This is gonna key in to the throttle body so that it sits in proper, and then we'll get the 3 T30s started. I'm just gonna use the 1/4 inch ratchet to give them a gentle snug. Torque spec for these T30s are 8 Newton meters, not a whole lot. So we're just gonna give them a little cinch. I'm taking this car right back apart after this video, but 8 Newton meters if you wanna put a torque wrench on it. We have an electrical connector here and an electrical connector here that we need to plug back in. This one can go in right here. You'll see that most of these wires kind of rest in their natural spot of where they wanna be. And we got this one right here. Alligator clip. All right, let's continue on with the next few bits. All right, we're gonna feed in the silencer portion of our box. This goes right into the turbo inlet. Before we click that baby all the way in, I'm gonna get that evap line situated onto here first. Beautiful. So plug this baby in. Let's wrap this underneath these other two. Okay, beautiful. Now we can click this all the way into the turbo. Give it a couple pulls, make sure it's not gonna come out. We'll hook up that other evap line up top in a little bit. All right, let's take care of our diverter valve. That one's gonna run through the front here of this evap line. Click that baby in. That's gonna bite down on this air box right there. This can plug back into the valve cover, like so. All right, that's locked in down there. We have one more evap line that runs from the vent valve, or it's a 2-piece vent valve and the intake manifold down to the inlet feed by the turbo, so we can clip those babies in next. Here is our old one that we pulled off, and you know, the top one is in pretty good shape, the one with the sensor on it still, but we do carry all of them individually. So we bought both of them, and I'm gonna join them here. That one's good to rock, and then we'll hook them up. Let's hook them up over here to the turbo side of things first. We have our electrical connector right here. All right, that baby's all situated. Now let's get the other part of our airbox in. It's easier to feed these grommets back into the strut tower than to try to install it with the air box. So if they came up with you, just take them off. All right, this baby is nice and situated. Let's get it plugged back in. That's gonna be this connector right here. Lock that baby in. Alligator clip right here. Boom. All right, let's head underneath. Let's button up those shields, and then we'll come back up top and get the battery situated in the trunk, and then we can move on to filling and bleeding the coolant system. All right, we had ended up taking out this corner shield just to give you a better view of the low temp circuit coolant line that we drained from, to drain the cooler from. So we're gonna throw that one back on first, a couple 8 mils, then we'll move on to the middle piece and then the rear half, and we'll be one step closer to being done. All right, let's switch over to the torque wrench. And these 18 mils get torqued to 56 Newton meters. All right, now let's get the last bit of plastic shielding in, and we'll head back up top. All right, they're all started. I'm just gonna snug them up real quick, and then I'll meet you in the trunk. We'll get the battery hooked back up, and then we'll fill this baby up. All right, it has come time to fill our cooling system. We're gonna be filling the low temp and high temp circuit. Total capacity for the two systems combined is just about 14 liters, 9.8 for the high temp, 4.1 for the low temp. Again, that's assuming that they are fully empty. We didn't crack the block anywhere, so there's probably gonna be a little bit of coolant there. So we have enough coolant if we were doing these from a completely dry fill. We have 2 gallons of HT12 concentrate and 2 gallons of distilled water mixed together. We're gonna fill these both up, and then from there we'll talk about how to run the bleeding procedure. They're pretty similar for the low temp and high temp circuit, with the exception of the high temp requiring the engine to be ran. So we'll kind of go over that. We'll start with the low temp, see if both systems are being bled with the electronic pumps, and if not, we'll still cover the high temp circuit per BMW. So first things first, we have our U-View tool ready to rock and roll. We'll start with the high temp circuit, fill that up, and then we'll move to the low temp, and then we'll talk again about the bleeding and go a little bit more in depth. All right, we have our air hooked up. We're gonna get that valve closed, and we're gonna pull vacuum. I like to use a towel around the breather valve here. Sometimes it can mist out whatever's in the system, and you don't wanna get coolant all over the place if you don't have to. And we're gonna try to hit about 25 on our gauge. Once we pull vacuum to about 25, we're gonna let it sit for a minute or two, just to make sure we have no leaks. It's totally normal to see the coolant lines starting to collapse on themselves, which is exactly what you want to see. What you don't want to see is that needle dropping after you have stopped. That means you have a leak somewhere. So let's hope to avoid that. All right, we can see the upper radiator hose is totally collapsed under that AC line. Just peeking underneath the air box, I can see the lower one is totally folded in on itself too. That's exactly what we want to see. Our gauge is staying perfect. It has not dropped the hair, which also means that not only is our cooling system not leaking, but our tool isn't leaking too. That can be a big problem if the tool is bad that you're using. I'll let that sit for a minute, and then our next job is going to be to ensure that this feed line always remains at the bottom of your coolant bucket. If at any point air goes in there, it's going to totally kill the process. It's going to allow air into the system. You'll have to drain and do this again. So let's try to avoid that. So yeah, I'll see you in a minute, and then we'll go from there. All right, what I'm going to do first might be a little bit overkill, but it's something I like to practice here. I'm going to keep my line submerged. I'm just going to fill the bleed tool, or prime it first. So I'm going to open that, let the coolant hit the valve, close it right away. We'll pull vacuum for another 5 seconds, and then we'll open it in full. So now the system's primed. Let's pull vacuum for another minute. All right, now we're going to open that valve, keeping this line fully submerged, and we'll stop once it stops pulling coolant. All right, at this point, our tool is done feeding our high temp circuit. You can also start to see some air here in the line, which is totally fine. We're gonna lift this up, and move over to our low temp tank. We have 1.75 gallons, so just under 2 gallons of coolant left, which means this took just over 2. We have again a total capacity of 4.1 liters for the low temp circuit, so just over a gallon. So we have more than enough coolant here to take care of that. All right, same thing, we're gonna pull vacuum on this, we'll prime the line, and then we'll let it fill. Now it's been sitting, gauge is good. Let's prime this line once more. All right, now I'm gonna open up the valve, keep the line at the bottom, and just make sure we don't run out of coolant in our bucket. All right, at this point, the low temp has stopped taking in coolant. We're gonna remove our air, line off of the tool. We're gonna close the valve. Open this up gently, and then we'll open up the valve and let the coolant back into our bucket. This we'll throw back into our BMW containers. We'll write on them that they're mixed, so we know they're good for topping off or filling this car up. Once we get all cleaned up, then let's pick it up with the bleeding procedure. We'll cover both of the procedures for the high temp and the low temp circuit, and then we'll start with the low temp circuit. All right, for the high temp and low temp circuits, you want the expansion tanks at the min level. There's a yellow circle inside that shows your max. It's a 2-step bit. The top is your max, the bottom is your low. You're gonna wanna set both of them to low before you run the bleeding procedure. We have the low temp circuit set already. I just pulled some coolant out of the high temp circuit. We're gonna put the lids on. I'm not gonna close them fully just yet, because while we run the low temp circuit bleeding, I wanna see if anything's actually happening to the high temp circuit. Regardless, we are gonna run the high temp bleeding procedure right after the low temp one. So with that, let's hop in the car and let's get this thing going. All right, so let's talk about the bleeding procedure really quick and how the low temp and high temp circuits differ a little bit. Again, this is all per BMW. The goal here is that we're gonna be putting the car in a service mode basically. So using the start stop engine button, we're gonna hit that 3 times quickly with our foot off the pedals. And then from there, the key to keeping the car awake long enough to run the bleeding procedure, which is about 11 minutes, we're gonna have to turn on the low beams and the hazards at the same time. That'll keep the ignition from turning off and cutting the bleeding procedure short. It helps to have a battery tender on your battery, especially if your battery is a little bit older during this whole process, as 11 minutes is a bit of time and you do have lights and hazard lights running at the same time. Once the hazard lights and the low beam lights are on, we're gonna make sure that the car is not in Eco Pro mode. We're gonna turn our temp setting on the heater controls here to the highest, with the fan setting to the lowest. Once we have those things taken care of, we're gonna hold our foot on the accelerator pedal for about 10 seconds. And then from there, we should audibly be able to hear the auxiliary pumps engage. At that point, the service is just gonna run for about 11 minutes, again, which is why we recommend you put a tender on that battery. Once that's done, then we can go back into the expansion tank, check the level, and set the low temp cooling circuit to the full line. Now, where things get a little bit different for the high temp circuit, I have a feeling that both water pumps are gonna actuate for both circuits. However, per BMW, to properly bleed the high temp circuit, we're gonna do all of the mentioned previously. We're gonna set low beams on, hazard lights on, temp to the highest, fan speed to the lowest, foot on the accelerator pedal for about 10 seconds. And then from there, we're gonna start the car. We should see a service function on the dash that's saying in service mode, and it's gonna run the car and control the RPMs for the next 11 minutes, keeping it at about 3,500 RPM. So it's important that the car is in park, on the ground, tanks are sealed up, hood is closed, as if you were gonna drive almost, and then just let the car do its thing for about 11 minutes. From there, you're gonna wanna let the car fully cool down, or at least below 50 degrees Celsius, so that you can open the cap safely and check the coolant level there. So again, a little bit different. Once we get the low temp circuit bleeding, we're gonna hop over to the front and just take a look and see if we can see the coolant flowing through the low temp circuit expansion tank, and then see if we see anything on the high temp side as well. I have a feeling both are gonna run, but again, high temp requires the engine running. So Let's start with the low temp cooling circuit first. And for that, we're gonna start stop engine 3 times quickly. We're gonna turn on low beams. We're gonna turn on our hazards. We're gonna set our temp to the highest. We're gonna turn that off. We don't need that. That's fine. We're just gonna point through the center vents. We're gonna turn our blower speed down as much as possible. All right. I'm gonna make sure that the car is not in Eco Pro mode. I don't believe it is. Now we're gonna hold the throttle pedal for about 10 seconds. On the dash, we have service function started. And now we let the car sit for about 11 minutes. Again, tender's on. Let's hop up front and let's take a look and see if we can see the coolant flowing through that low temp circuit tank and maybe something out of the high temp circuit. For the high temp circuit, we're gonna do exactly the same once this procedure finishes for the low temp, except after we do the throttle pedal for 10 seconds, then we're gonna start the car. So I'll see you in a little bit again when we go to do that. We don't have anything happening just yet, but we did hear the auxiliary pumps actuate a second ago. Here we go. You can see coolant flowing on the low temp side. Do we have anything over here? Nothing on the high temp. It's not a bad idea to keep an eye on this. If you need to top it off a little bit to keep it at that low level, you can. As long as there's coolant in the tank and something for there to flow, you're gonna be fine. All right, so with that, we're gonna let the 11 minutes lapse and then we'll pick it back up and do this again, but for the high temp circuit. And again, just to reiterate, nothing is happening with the high temp system right now. There's no coolant flowing, which means we are gonna have to follow the separate procedure for the high temp, which requires starting the engine. So I'll see you in about 11 minutes, or a second for you, I suppose. I don't know, grab a snack or something if you want.
11 minutes later.
At this point, our 11 minutes are up. The low temp circuit is looking great. I need a splash of coolant and that's gonna hit the max mark. Once I get that done, we're gonna throw the cap on that. We're gonna throw the cap on the high temp circuit. Just taking one last look at where the level is right now. Put the cap on it, and then we're gonna initiate the same procedure again, plus starting the car, letting it run for 11 minutes. The car is gonna do its own thing from there. And then once that's done, we'll turn the car off, let it fully cool down, and we'll top off the coolant level as needed. All right, now we're gonna do the high temp circuit bleed. Hood is closed, car is on the ground, we're in park, all 4 wheels are touching the ground again. We're gonna do the same thing, start stop engine 3 times, hazards, low beams, temp on high, fan on low, accelerator pedal for 10 seconds. Then we're gonna start the car and we should see a service function started on the dash, at which point the car is gonna control the RPMs and go from there. High, fan on low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One more for insurance. Start the car. Service function started. That's exactly what we want to see. From here, we're going to let the car run for 11 minutes. That's the length of the bleeding procedure. The car is going to control the RPMs. They're going to drive up as high as 3,500 RPM and so on and so forth. When the service is done, it's going to drop down back to idle. And it's worth mentioning that because the car is running, you don't really need the tender at that point. The car is going to be charging. However, we're going to leave everything else as it is. The hazards on, the low beams on, the door open, and just let the car do its thing. Catch you in 11 minutes. All right, with the car back together, the systems bled. Again, we covered both low temp and high temp circuit. That is going to conclude this DIY for today. The radiator replacement being a pretty straightforward job. Again, we highly recommend doing the radiator hoses if you can. While you're doing that, at a minimum, don't forget to lube them up before you hook them back up. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And please be sure to consider subscribing if you want to see more videos, especially the other 5 left in this cooling system overhaul. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.